So, welcome everybody to our Q&A. I've got Larry and Richie with me here. I'm going to play Pat Sajak today, or pick your host du jour, I suppose. Alex Trebek, Pat Sajak, what have you. I won't put on my radio voice. So we're going to be watching the Q&A, and I'm going to get these gentlemen to field the questions as they come in, and we've got a couple in advance that we're going to go through. So first and foremost, regarding Power 11, as everybody knows, Power 11 was released about a week or so ago. And I guess number one question, what operating system versions are supported on Power 11, guys?
Yeah, I can grab that one. On Power 11, the oldest version of IBM I that's supported is 7.4. Then it will obviously support the most current version of IBM I, which is 7.6.
Yep, and just a couple of side notes on that. As you might well remember, Power 11 didn't exist when 7.4 came out, so you're going to want to have TR12 on 7.4, or your 7.4 won't recognize your Power 11. And for 7.5, you're going to want to have TR6 on there. 7.6 is supported out of the box, of course, and then there's that other operating system. What do they call it? AIX, I believe.
With an A, I know.
Yeah, there you go. Many releases of that are also supported on Power 11, as well as the mainline Linux distributions. So,
Right, fair. I think one of the biggest questions, I suppose, and I noticed this out of the gate when we were, of course, all three of us are under NDA with IBM, and so we kind of heard this news a little while ago, and when the announcement came out, it kind of, it held true to what their plan was going to be. But my first thought is, where is the continuation of the 720, 814, 914, 1014? I don't see an S1114. Let's chat about it for a second.
Yes. So some of you may remember that when the Power 10 was announced, the 1014, there were a few of us that started counting I/O slots and went 1, 2, 3, 5, only 5, and we realized that on those machines, if you were, just doing a single LPAR, you were good. But if you bought the 6 or 8 core machine, you ran out of slots. It was very difficult to do VIO. A couple of VIO, you ran out of. It was very complicated, and IBM immediately fixed that back in Power 10 by creating the 22B model, which is a 2U 2-socket guy with 4 cores in a socket, and then you got all 10 I/O slots. And they realized that was kind of a better answer anyway, because for one, it's only 2 U's high. That's an advantage if you're a data center guy. So with the Power 11, they did the same thing. They said, you know what? Let's don't even do a single socket. Let's just do the 2U 2-socket. Give us 10 slots. Gives us more memory DIMM positions as well. So that's where they went with that. Is the 1014 basically is a thing of the past. There will be no 1114.
It kind of covers off one of the other questions that was in here about, what's the value of a second socket?
Yeah, no, for sure. It's
more
really
PCIe slots.
More PCIe slots, and of course more memory DIMM slots. So yeah, big benefit there. Indeed.
So let's continue that line of thinking there for a second. So when we were putting in, say, Power 10 machines, and Larry, you've done your fair share of configurations here. So what would you see? Yeah, it's laughable. I know. Larry's seen in a server room from time to time. So I guess my question would be, how often we see Power 10 configurations that you need to kick out, like say for a 1014, and you're kicking out an expansion unit for extra card slots. I'm going to assume that's more often than not for a relatively medium-sized machine.
And that That was exactly the issue, because as soon as you need to add that card slot expansion, right, that is an amazing amount of cost. You've got the drawer itself, you've got the connectors, you're using up a high-speed slot in the existing machine, um, and in many cases, you needed two more slots or even one more slot. So we avoided that as soon as they came out with the 22S, right? The ability to put those two sockets in there. So that in itself, your earlier question, what's the value of that second socket? Well, that adding those 5 more slots, really, it's pretty rare now, very rare to see an expansion on those 1 and 2 socket machines. So that's a huge value to the customer then.
Yeah, and even from like a data real estate in the data center from a rack use standpoint, I mean, you went from basically getting forced into that PCIe expansion drawer, which is another 3U. So you're talking about 7U tied up in an 8-core machine to run IBM I, let's say. Now the 2-socket machine, we're still getting the 8 cores. So it's 2 4-core sockets, but we're getting a ton more PCIe slots, and we're packaging all of that into this, really pretty dense 2U form factor. So when you look at organizations who have a handful of racks in their data center, rack space tends to be, it's valuable. When you can shrink the footprint down drastically like that, there's a lot of benefits.
Yep. And a lot of people didn't realize if you don't do this stuff every day, like Richie and I and Steve do, you you didn't even really pay much attention to the fact that all of the IO adapters were only 2U high anyway. It was the tailstock, that extra metal piece on the back, that made a card into a 4U card. And so I have a table that we use internally all the time, and it has, what's the feature code for this card in a 2U? What's the feature code in a 4U? The CCIN number is the same. So every single one of these features has a short and a tall version, and the only difference is the tailstock. So you didn't lose anything by going to 2U. There weren't anything. It's like, if you remember back in the old days, we had integrated X series servers. They were 5Us tall and double wide and all. There's nothing like that anymore. Everything continues to shrink. 64 gig fiber adapters. These big.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd say about, at least with the 1122, is, I mean, you can scale, really high with this 2U, 1122 machine. I think the one caveat, we still have this, we'll call it 4-core limitation or rule with IBM I, where even on the full 60-core 1122, you're limited to IBM I only being able to use 4 cores per LPAR, but you can stack in 15 LPARs of IBM I onto a 60-core machine. You're still living in the P10 processor tier for software, which is a beautiful thing.
Exactly. And when you look at the CPU jump, we were kind of led to believe that Power 10 to Power 11 wouldn't be that big of a jump. And then we got there and they went, surprise, it's another 25%. Woo. So you look at the number of CPW that you get in those 4 cores on a Power 11 machine, and it's a lot. It's a huge number. I believe about 120,000 CPW in 4 cores. That's more than most customers have any need for. So you're really in that 2U machine. That's big value. We really like those machines.
Yeah, well, let's jump in the opposite direction. Where's your P05 software tier machine?
If that's going to be given in 2026.
Yep. Look into the future. Yep.
Okay. So, and that's a conversation I'm sure that we're going to, we're having with customers and we're going to have with customers. So from, I guess the perspective of somebody with a, a P05 Power 10 and saying, hey, I want to go for a P05 Power 11. You can't just yet.
Nope.
So sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose people with leasing and things like that, and I've got a couple of customers in that boat that have a lease expiring in, I think that I've got 2 with leases expiring in April of next year. I have no idea whether the machine is going to be available at that. So you might have to, extend the lease a little bit and so on and so forth, and then move to the machine if you're going to stick on the P05.
Yeah, part of IBM's thing there was that the 1012 machine was recently announced, right? That didn't come out when all the rest of the Power 10 stuff came out. And from a pure CPW standpoint, if you're in the P05 tier, it's just not an issue, right? I mean, that thing has a tremendous amount of capability. The P05 tier's biggest limitation has for some time been the 64 gigs of RAM. So, and that limit is unlikely to change. It's just not. IBM hasn't even hinted in that direction. So, your S1012 is going to support that customer, with the exception of what Steve mentions, that the guy whose lease is ending says, now what do I do?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think as a partner too, our job isn't just to sell a bunch of things. Our job is to advise customers on, kind of, or give them options for what that, the next best move is, right? And for folks that are on a 4-core Power 10, the constraint there is going to typically be memory. It's not going to be processor, because and the benefit to going to Power 11 from a CPW per core standpoint probably isn't going to matter to them as much. So maybe Power 10, if you're on Power 9, landing on Power 10 might not be a bad spot for you if you're looking to get 4 years, 5 years out of your machine.
Yeah, and we're still selling Power 10s, and I sold, I think, 3 in the last 5-6 weeks, which is great. I'll sell Power 10 all day long still, if need be. The value of the Power 11 seems to be there, but that kind of leads to another question in terms of value. Maybe not value, but cool factor. Maybe. What's your favorite feature on the Power 11 machine? Not IBM i7-6, because there's a ton of those that we can talk about as well. But from a Power 11 perspective, what do you think is the coolest thing out there? You mentioned a tiny 60, 4 gig fiber adapter.
Yeah, for me, I think the IBM messaging in the way that they're approaching promotion of Power 11 tells a big story that I don't know that they, at least on the front side, it wasn't something that was being, kind of shouted from the mountaintops, which is, IBM is very different from a overall infrastructure stack standpoint than any other vendor out there, because they control things from the silicon all the way through to the operating system, and then even some of the apps that run on the OS. So the optimization, and it's one thing. So when I go through these decks trying to learn all the cool things that are coming out with Power 11, the one theme that I noticed is they optimize the silicon, they optimize the memory, they optimize the operating system. They're optimizing specific pieces of software that they built the hardware around to run faster. So it isn't, from a performance standpoint, yeah, we have our CPW, but then there's also certain types of workloads. A lot of them are, even some accelerated workloads that they build optimization into the application and the hardware, so they mesh and they can perform even better. So I think the full stack improvement was really cool to see.
And I agree with that. I attended an IBM Announce event. I was actually in Toronto last week, and this is the first IBM Announce event I've attended where they did not lead with speeds and feeds. Right? We've always hear CPWs and gigabytes and megabytes and all of these things. They didn't talk about that at all. They talked about maintainability, uptime, security, these sorts of things. So they've enhanced some of the secure boot stuff, better encryption, um, vastly more difficult to for the bad guys to get in there and upset your machine. Lots of maintainability things. Many of the cores now, the processors have extra cores in there that can be switched in. So just a tremendous number of things on maintainability. We've all known that, I don't know, has it been a decade? It's more than a decade, but how much more than a decade has Power Systems been the number one most reliable server out there? But IBM's not saying, well, we got the record, nobody's going to beat us. No, they're working on that. They're improving that. So that's another big step forward with these Power 11 systems is they're going for more nines, right? We're talking about 6 nines now. And I love the fact that they're making it more and more reliable for the customer and working on ways to get that as close as they can, to the next level of nines. And every one of those nines, of course, is not just a few minutes. Now you're cutting that downtime by a tenth every time, or by 90% less every time. So that's where I really love the Power 11s in that way.
Yeah, cool. We have 16 gigabit fiber. Can we still connect to a Power 11?
Yeah, for sure. If you one of the interesting things, so I worked on the Red Book with IBM on the Power 11s, and one of the questions that we were kind of beating IBM up with is, hey, where'd all our 16 gig adapters go? And they said, well, the manufacturers just aren't making them anymore. So it's really hard for us to sell things that aren't being made. The good news is there's one 16 gig adapter that you can still install in your Power 11 if you happen to have them, but no worries because the 32 gig adapters will downshift both to 16 gig and 32 gig or 8 gig if you're connected to a switch. There are a couple that will there's actually one feature code, it's got a tall and a short feature that will also downshift to 8 gig if it's direct connected to a tape driver of ETL without a switch. But most of the stuff, all the 32 gig adapters will downshift to 16. And even the 64s, if you put in 64 gig adapters, those will downshift to 16 as well if they're connected to a switch. So yep, you're good. No problem there.
Okay. What HMC, hardware management console, will support a Power 11?
We're just CR2
Yep.
for Power 11, or the virtual HMC if you've gone down that path as well. You just have to be, I forget what the code level is.
Code level, yeah, HMC level 11. Yeah. Yep. So as you can imagine, and one of the things that's it used to be a lot more complicated. Now they've done some things over the past several releases. So code level 9 required for Power 9, 10 for Power 10, 11 for Power 11. And just a side note, you should know this if you're an HMC person. If you have a lot of equipment in your data center and you upgrade your HMC to HMC version 11, then you will drop off support for your Power 7s off the HMC. They will disappear if you still have any of those running. You probably shouldn't, but we know this happens out there. So each time the HMC goes up a level, you drop off one level of servers off the back end.
Okay. Richie, this is probably a good one for you. Pricing compared to Power 10. What does Power 11 look like? I know I've done a couple, and I've had some questions. What do you think?
It's a little different model of pricing on Power 11, which is fine. When you're talking about maybe strictly comparing the price, I did a quick comparison for a machine like an 1122 that's running BIOS, so we didn't take into account any like internal NVMe storage or anything like that, but just kind of standard run of the mill config that would be built for like supporting BIOS and external storage. And we saw like a 7 to 9% increase from Power 10 to a Power 11. But when you look at, per core performance increase between Power 10 and Power 11, you're getting, we'll call it 15 to 25% increase. From an overall performance standpoint, you're probably netting out. You're going to be in a better position on Power 11, putting your money there.
That's fair. I think part of the configurations that I've done, they've all been Power 8, Power 9. Currently going to Power 11s and a couple of Power 10s. But the ones that we did do, the big difference is not necessarily on the hardware, but somebody who does not have a subscription license, they're moving to a subscription-based IBM license, and then they've consolidated all those LPPs into the operating system for the most part. So yeah, the subscription, when you look at it, it's like that's a kind of a hefty number now, but all the LPPs are bundled into it. Not all of them. Most of the LPPs are bundled into them, so it's just kind of displayed a little bit differently. So when somebody sees the the line items we're looking at, and they're seeing a big number for the software, it's like, well, that big number was kind of already there. It was just spread out over a whole bunch of different line items, and now it's in one, really.
Yep.
Yeah, and when I went through, I've done several configurations. Probably in the last week, I've done a half a dozen just specifically for comparison of features. If you look at memory to memory, same pricing, 16 gig fiber or 32 gig fiber, 64 gig fiber, same pricing, Ethernet card, and for those feature cards, they're the same cards, so no issue there. One thing we noticed was the actual CPU for the Power 10 was more expensive than the CPU on the Power 11. You go, wait a minute, the CPU price went down? But as Richie was mentioning, the activation thing is different on the Power 11. So the net of it is pretty close, but your initial reaction is, what is this line item? I don't want this line item. Well, that's the activations, and you need to have them active if you're going to use them. But as Steve was saying, for those that are coming from perpetual licensing to subscription licensing, that's the biggest thing to get your head around. IBM did simplification. That's awesome. Lots of things you no longer have to purchase. But now with subscription, you're going to have, and your SWAMA goes away because it's part of your subscription. So some things are better and some things are a little bit more expensive, but that's probably where you'll spend most of the time figuring it out.
Yeah, and I think IBM did a good job recovering from the initial launch of subscription with Power 10, especially for IBM iShop. And if you haven't guessed, I'm an IBM i guy, I guess, because I keep talking about it. But at first, the subscription wasn't released. There wasn't a separate subscription released for folks who already made the investment in the operating system. It's just a single subscription. So IBM came to the table after a lot of maybe poking and prodding, but there's a separate subscription that takes into consideration the license for customers that would have typically transferred a license. You get a discounted subscription offering because you made that investment previously.
All right, I've got a question from the audience, and please don't be shy. Is NVMe storage the way to go? Single LPAR, or another storage recommendation, or existing SAN storage, or external SAN storage for multiple LPARs?
This is something Richie and I have been, for many years, right? Richie and I have been working together for a long time, and the whole external storage thing, we're big fans. There's a lot of advantages to external storage, but rather than going to them, the question here is NVMe storage the way to go? And for a single LPAR that doesn't have the requirement for replication, doesn't have the requirement for flash copy and those kind of things, you can encrypt your NVMe now, encryption at rest, right? Those things are all SED based. and NVMe is redonkulously fast. And so for a small LPARs, even, kind of medium LPARs, if you're a one core machine, one core user, internal disk, it's going to fly. It's going to be a decent, solution for you.
Yeah, and it's a simple configuration. Everything's managed in IBM I. It's a very straightforward configuration. I also have to say, so NVMe, it can be internal NVMe to IBM I, or the underlying storage that we can put into, say, a flash system is also NVMe. So similar technology. With IBM flash systems, if you get to the 5300 model, you get introduced to flash core modules. There are a lot of benefits to that. But if it's a single standalone LPAR, internal NVMe is great. I would maybe at least have a question or have a conversation with the customer and ask them, why a single LPAR? Have you heard of flash copy? Have you heard all these things at the storage level that we could take advantage of, which happens to push you into a world where you have more than just a single LPAR, a single standalone environment. So it really comes down to what the customer is looking for, and any pain that we can help them remove, regardless of the solution, whether it's internal or external storage.
And additional things to consider, we see a lot of customers. One of my good customers here in Western Michigan for a lot of years has set an employee-owned company on the building, and then they went public. Whoops. The rules change, right? Now you got compliance. You can't be doing development on your production partition when you're a publicly held company. Whoopsie. So they had built, their existing machines with no ability to do LPARs. And, the next question obviously was, hey, Larry, how do we build LPARs? If you have SAN storage, great. Internal storage, they weren't out of options, right? You can do IBM I, hosting IBM I. That's great technology. You have to understand the limitations, but they were able to do that. Their next generation SAN storage, so yay. But yeah, there's other reasons too sometimes that you find out that, hey, having another LPAR, and once it's kind of like candy, you grab one and you go, wow, these are really good. You get into LPARs on your SAN, and the next thing you know is, hey, could we have one for QA? Sure. Can we have one for testing? Sure. And that's the beauty of it though, because now you can leverage that capability to do things, makes it easier than what it was with the internal disk.
It's if you give a mouse a cookie, right?
That's right.
That's another
Potato chips for me. Yeah, no, I had a customer we were at Power up in Anaheim, and a customer was going to pull the trigger on a Power 10. Okay. And I was waiting for the purchase order. Instead, I got an email saying, I want to double our storage and I want an HMC, because they were traditionally a single LPAR LAN console kind of group. Pardon me there. And they're like, you know what? They have a new IT director. And he said, you know what? We're done doing development on the same production system that we've always done. So we're going to split this into two, and we're going to double our storage, and we're going to do this properly. We're going to do BIOS. We're going to do, so on and so forth. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm cool with that. Let's do that. Because it makes a heck of a lot of sense to segregate those environments. And you want to do it I don't want to say you want to do it the right way, but doing HMC, virtual HMC or physical, whatever. But when you do it with an HMC and BIOS, you do things with a lot more options than what you have with iHosting, I would argue.
Yes, I definitely agree.
You're essentially building your own internal scalable cloud infrastructure stack, because you have all the components that you need to spin up an additional LPAR to do whatever you want, or you can do 10, just kind of distributing compute resources at that point.
Fair. Another one from the audience. What are your recommendations for external storage? Buy a lot of it. There you
Yeah.
Buy more. Yeah.
go. Keep buying it.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
I think IBM has done a phenomenal job of consolidating a lot of the features and functions inside their storage portfolio over the last 5 years. So, you know, storage tends to be pretty simple from a sizing standpoint because you got to figure out. I mean, SAN storage, it's basically adding a brain to your back end storage and letting it kind of manage itself. And so you got to figure out how big of a brain you need, how much performance you need at the storage level, and then you can also look at there's some kind of critical points in the portfolio. One of the most important ones I think is you get into the 5300 and you get introduced to flash core modules. The flash core modules are a game changer from a per terabyte standpoint when you compare to standard NVMe versus, kind of, we'll call it an NVMe on steroids. Um, with flash core modules, you're getting, I mean, even without the no performance penalty, encryption and compression, you're already cheaper with the flash core modules per terabyte. So I think that threshold is if you can get past that, then you get ransomware threat detection, like at the flash core module level. Like there's a lot of features and functions that come with those flash core modules that could be very valuable to an organization.
And those flash core modules, it's kind of hard to get your head around it, but an individual flash core module today for a 5300 or its bigger brothers has more storage than the largest AS400 at announced date. It has more processing power than the largest AS400 at announced date. I'm not sure much RAM's in there, but it's probably more than the largest AS400 had announced. And that's just in this little bitty module, right? So those things it's an amazing amount of capability there. And one of my the flash system stuff, there's a lot of cool features, but my personal favorite feature on the flash system, whether it's 5300, 7300, 9300, is the fact that if you buy this thing with, let's say, 8 modules and you build it in as DDR or RAID 6 with a distributed hot spare, right? Great. And now somebody comes along and says, so we need another 15 terabytes. In the old days, right, it was build a new RAID set. In these, it's add the modules. The system will then envelop the new drive, include it in RAID, not like the old days on I-series machines where there was unprotected drives and, well, they were protected, but they didn't have any RAID stripe. None of that. It completely smooths that over the span of a day or so, depends on the size of the module you add. And so now the thing is completely natively enveloped in that expansion. So you can add one module or 2 modules at a time and not lose your protection, and it improves the performance again. So that's just literally one of my coolest features of those things, and there's a ton of them in there. And they work so well with IBM I and with the Power system. So especially you get VIOS in there. Yep.
So there's an add-on question from Scott there. He said, more specifically, and you and I just talked about this morning, more specifically, can you talk about non-IBM storage? So I want to tackle that real quickly.
Because I have an answer.
I know you might have a more technical answer than my answer would be, because my answer is not technical. So I have a customer that's has a third-party SAN, and they're thinking, hey, I want to, I've got a fairly hefty SAN. I want to attach my new Power Systems machine to that SAN and present disks to the Power Systems box and our IBM I partitions and so on and so forth. And they're like, can we do this? And I remember, I think back in the Frank and I days of, when I was introduced to your website maybe 20 years ago by Kevin Mort at my first comment in 2002, 2001. One of the taglines was where supported and will work are two different things. Because Larry, if you don't know Larry, which I'd be surprised if you don't, he would, whatever it was, 24 disk drives allowed to attach to a Power, or an IBM AS400 170. Larry would hang 124 off of them and power them with, all the power supplies needed and extra fans plugged into the wall, and et cetera, et cetera. So my comment to the customer was, technical aspects aside, can you make it work? Yes. Okay. My concern, being your account executive, would be selling you something, a power systems machine, with your intention to hang it off a SAN. That's not IBM. If you call IBM for support and you have a issue, let's just say you have a performance problem, IBM may look at whatever you've got there and say, that's not an IBM SAN. We think the performance problem is, somebody else, whoever the vendor is. That's their problem. We're not touching it. And they have every right to do that. So what I would probably recommend is if you do go that route where you're mixing your storage and your processing power, or your compute and your storage, that you understand that you may have two vendors pointing at each other and you as the customer not getting any value. So that's the only thing that I would probably add to that conversation. And Larry, you had some technical things as well about NPIV versus iSCSI, and I'm not even going to attempt to really go there. So I'll leave that to you guys.
Yeah, and my primary comment is exactly what you just said. It's not supported, right? There was a thing where EMC storage was supported for a while. That's already been not extended. IBM says, nope, we're done with that. There was, like I say, there was some cooperation there. Most of the non-IBM storage, if not all of it, all of what I'm aware of, does not do NPIV. So you can't do the standard create a host on the SAN, assign some volumes to it, and have an IBM partition now see those volumes directly. You have to assign them to VIO. VIO then sees them as HDisks. You now map those HDisks over vSCSI to the individual IBM partitions. And does that work? Yes. Is there a performance penalty for going that route? Not really. There's all kind of guys that have tried to beat that up and make it sound like, oh, it's going to be way slower. There's stuff going on. It doesn't really. But it's more complicated, and there's more opportunity for mistakes there. If you blow up your VIOS configuration, and I have helped people undo this problem, they didn't have all those mappings. And so now which of those HDisks map to which IBM partitions? Oh my goodness. Shame on them for not having backups. We fixed it for them. It was not a quick process. So, and as Steve said, it's not supported. So you call IBM and they say, well, we think IBM Power chips, working great. VIOS is running great. IBMI is great. Your problem's in the storage. Okay. I mean, one of the funny cartoons my dad had in the years, he was a TV radio repairman, and he's standing at the front door of a house. There's an antenna on the roof, and there's all power lines running through this antenna. And he says to the lady of the house, ma'am, I have found the problem with your antenna, with your TV. It's in the antenna, and it's going to stay there, right? How are you going to fix that, right? It's so. This is the problem when you get into the non-IBM storage, as Steve said, finger pointing, and finger pointing doesn't help anybody get anything fixed.
Yeah, and I know also as of recently, so Dell, so IBM dropped support because they had a support model for Dell storage, and that is no longer in play anymore.
Right.
It's another thing to think about.
Yep.
Okay.
I think there was another question, Steve, about internal only storage for
Power 11.
Power 11. Yeah, from Timothy.
Said, is NVMe the only internal storage option in Power 11?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Vanessa put a question here. She had a couple of questions through email. I've heard about the energy efficient mode. What do you know about it? Can it really help improve our carbon footprint?
Yeah.
Somebody asked me about a turbo button the other day. He said, "Remember that? You have a turbo button on your laptop or PC."
PC. Yeah, you had to unpush it so you could play that old Windows jukebox game or whatever.
I have
the
no
pinball
idea
game.
what you guys are talking about.
Richie's
Might
never
be an
seen
age
it.
thing,
Sorry.
though.
Yeah. Yeah. So Power has had an energy mode of various energy modes since I believe Power 6. But they were, in many cases, you could only, flip it in high power mode or low power mode. And in some cases, I think on Power 6 even, you had to reboot the thing to get it to shift gears. What they've done with Power 11 is they've said, okay, we can do max power, we can do a middle of the road, and we can do, minimum power. We found in their testing, they found that the middle of the road mode is actually closer to the low end power, right? So it does save a lot of energy. And one of the cool things they've done is they've added a schedule in there now. So where it used to be a thing that you had to manually go in and say, well, I want this or that acceleration level. Now you can actually schedule it. So if you look at your workload, and we do this, for example, when we do system migrations or we price new systems, we like to go in and look how much you're using the system. And in Navigator for I, I'll go ahead and plug one of the things that we work in a lot. Navigator for I, you go in there and you look at the history mode, you see these nice, pretty graphs. And it's like, oh, look at this. From Saturday morning at 9 until Sunday night at 10, this machine is doing nothing. You can now schedule the energy mode to be minimal at that time, right? So it really does cut down the amount of power that the server itself is using. Doesn't necessarily affect your I/O, so you're going to have switches and your SAN and all that stuff still going to be consuming power, but it will significantly reduce the energy usage of your Power 11.
Now you just have to convert that into. I think we lost Richie. No, there he is. He just disappeared. Ideally, and if we were real slick, maybe this is a Richie task. Hey, Richie, we've just nominated you to figure out the power consumption and convert that to dollar value savings that moving to a Power 11 would customer.
I'll get right on.
Yeah, the fun part with that, I have a brother that lives in California, and he tells me that his power is much more expensive in California than it is here in Michigan. And we also know, so that's going to be a big geo thing. You're really going to have the customer enter their kilowatt hour price to get a real calculation, I think, because it also matters in your data center. You probably pay more for power because that includes your UPSs and your generators and whatnot. So, but yeah, that's a good task to understand what that savings is. And
Yeah,
even just going from spinning disk to NVMe is a big savings right there, for example.
Right.
Yeah, and I think IBM released, and I'd have to go hunt this down, but there's like a energy estimator calculator thing that they came out with. So,
yep.
Here's one. Options for moving forward when on Power 8 V7R3.
So my initial comments are, what's holding you back from going to 7.4?
Perfect.
That would be the first question, because I'm getting to 7.4. So getting to Power 11, the ticket to entry is getting to, at a minimum to 7.4. So,
yep.
And the other thing I would add to that is, if you're paying for extended support for 7.3, I would depending on how many licensed cores you have of IBM I would. There could be a considerable amount of money that you're paying every year for extended support that you could put towards bringing a resource in to help you get to 7.4, and then you'd have money left over probably to justify some of the cost of the Power 11 itself. So that extended support for 7.3 right now is not cheap.
Correct. That being said, for some, let's just say for the sake of example, you don't have software maintenance on your 7.3 system. Okay. So can you go from 7.3 on a Power 8 to 7.5 on a Power, 11? You can with a mixed mode migration.
Yep.
Not the recommended way to go.
Nope.
When we do it correctly. Where people get into trouble, and I'll be very honest, is where we pick up a lot of new customers, is they either try to do a mixed mode migration themselves, or they hire somebody who thinks they can do a mixed mode migration successfully, and they end up making a holy show of it, and the bat signal comes up, and Larry comes running, and we fix
the
them.
issue that you spend a lot of money command. Right?
Yeah. So if you're going to go that route, make sure that you go with somebody who knows what the heck they're doing. And as well, since we're talking upgrades, as well, make sure the differences are known in your environment, going from 7.3 to 7.5 or 7.3 to 7.4. You want to read the memo to users for every release, 7.4 and 7.5 if you're going to 7.5, because they're not cumulative.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go to that Power 11, you'll be under a new subscription anyway, so your licensing can be covered, so on and so forth. But you got options. Heck, we moved somebody, Mark Vedabunker, one of our installers. Mark was telling me about an install he did this past weekend. He came from a system on 5.2. It was a 5.2 system. I'm pretty darn sure that's what it was. And he went from a 5.2 system to a 7.5 system, and again, Mark's been trained to do it the right way. And it was a highly successful, complex upgrade, but we got it done. So you can get there. Then the closer you are to where you want to be makes it a little bit easier, for sure. And a lot easier in some instances.
Yeah, that's the further distance you have to travel, the more upfront work you have to do to make sure everything's going to work. So there's more work.
Oh, yeah.
And while this is the Power 11 webinar, if you think about the moving of releases, the very first rule is read the memo to users and don't skip any. We know we can do, Steve was saying, I can go from 7.3 to 7.5. Yes, I can. And I need to read the 7.5 memo to users, but I also need to read the 7.4 memo to users, because that stuff is cumulative, right? And if you go to 7.6, which is a wonderful operating system, and there's a nice red book out there on 7.6, there's a lot of cool stuff in there. And there's a few gotchas that you might run into. I'll just throw out one. If you have a startup program, everybody does, and it runs under Q Programmer because that's the default and it should run there, and you have not modified Q Programmer because you shouldn't, if you do start TCP interface in your startup program, it will fail under 7.6 because Q Programmer no longer has the authority to do that. Easy fix, very easy fix. But if you don't know that, you didn't read the memo to users, you didn't check out the red book, you start up on 7.6, the first startup, hey, why can't I get to my machine except on the console? Whoops. So these are things that IBM is doing to make the operating system more and more secure. We all hear the story. IBM I is so secureable, right? And IBM is now, putting some of this forward. So that's not a Power 11 thing. It's a 7.6 thing, but it may rear its head because you decided, hey, I'm going to go to 7.6 on my Power 11. And then you find a thing. So read those memo to users, and recognize that there's other changes in there for security as well. Significant number of changes in 7.6 relative to security. So
Very good. Just as an aside, Vanessa, when we get the video of this, I want to get the picture of Larry. I want to convert this, Larry saying into a GIF, so I can just post that into Teams when somebody says, "Hey, can we do this?" And I'll just throw up a Larry. Don't do that. Can I get a desk side unit? And V says, "You got it." So, Larry, you're going to be famous. Can I get a desk side Power 11 unit?
No. You can get a desktop
Yeah,
because you could take
desktop.
the rack based server and plop it on your desk, I guess. But
Yeah.
no, they're meant to be in racks.
It'll
Yep.
fit there if you have a
Yeah,
desk
it
big
would.
enough. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, you're going to need a big disk. And for those of you who haven't physically seen the 22A models, they are very deep. So if you're not using IBM racks, that's okay. The rails are set up to work in the square hole racks. We can in fact put round pegs in square holes, but the depth needs to be true full depth, because these things, there's a lot of stuff in there, very deep, front to back.
Okay. What type of memory is supported on a Power11?
That one's easy. It's DDR5. If you'd like to check again, it's still DDR5. Now, if you follow memory, if you're a gamer, you may have been, hey, when is DDR6 coming out? And guess what? The specification isn't even complete yet for DDR6. So clearly, IBM's not going to provide memory that conforms to an incomplete specification. But one thing that is true is that in both Power 10 and Power 11, the interface from the CPU chip, from the processor chip, over to the memory features is IBM proprietary. Now they've made it open source so others can use it, but that interface, being IBM's design, is not only half the size of DDR, meaning they can put twice as many channels on the same processor socket, 2 times the channels, 2 times the speed, but it's also twice as fast in the first place, so 4 times the speed. But because there's no DDR on that, the DDR is on the memory feature. So that's why in the middle of Power 10s, we went from DDR4 to DDR5.
Mhm.
So should the DDR6 specification be completed in time, and IBM sees that there's enough demand for people to go to DDR6, they could create DDR6 memory for a Power 11, and it would work just fine. Do I expect that? Don't know, because we don't know how long they're going to keep fighting over the actual spec for DDR6 at this point. That's out of our hands, but it could happen. So, but yeah, today it's all DDR5.
Yeah, and just a kind of shout out if anybody gets to, so Bill Starkey, who he is in charge of the chip and the memory, right, Larry?
Yeah, he's the chief architect for the Power architecture. Yep.
If you ever get to see, he does a presentation just on the different differentiators for memory that IBM has. And it is, I think we're going to start to see that as being a major game changer when you compare us to x86 industry standard kind of servers. So something to look into.
Yep. Very cool stuff.
Here's a question that has really nothing to do with Power 11. Well, somewhat, I suppose. When's the estimated date to certify with Oracle for JDE? Okay.
So my understanding from our JDE experts is that as long as you're on 7.5 of IBM I, no issue, because Oracle certifies to the release. However, they have not certified 7.6 yet. They have not made an announcement on that yet. And so look for that. They have apparently an announced cycle and something coming out here in third quarter, if I understand correctly. So there may be some further update at that time.
I'll throw in a plug for my Canadian compatriots because we acquired a company called Midrange in Toronto back in December, and they are now fully integrated with Service Express. They have a heck of a JDE services, managed services business. So, I'll give them a plug. As the Canadian in the room here now, I'm actually holding a Robertson. I had a Robertson screwdriver bit here on my kitchen table, and I'm, there's nothing more Canadian to me than a Robertson bit. It's, I would say it's probably our finest invention.
There you go.
Anyway, is there a reason for moving to Power 11 if you're already on Power 9 and have enough horsepower and memory?
So some of you have heard the term technical debt, and I wouldn't necessarily consider Power 9 at this point a terrible technical debt, but many Power 9s, IBM's already dropped maintenance. Um, the rest of the Power 9s, IBM is going to drop maintenance. So you're in an older machine. You may very well find that moving to a Power 11, you might be able to drop a core. You will almost certainly drop physical space, because many back in the days of Power 9, almost nobody was using the 2U boxes. Everybody was in the 4U. So you're going to drop space. You're going to drop power usage. You're going to gain performance. And now you're back onto a warranted machine with warranty that you can get maintenance on. That's just some of the things that totally make sense to me, looking at it from a hardware perspective.
Yeah, I think you got us. I think the threshold for me sometimes is when you have a piece of hardware that won't run the most current version of the operating system. That's a good time to start questioning yourself.
Yep.
Because you're kind of at that point, you're maybe not stagnant from what you can run on the machine. So say you're on 7.4, you can still go to 7.5, but all the new innovation that's going to come out in 7.6, you can't take advantage of the Power 9.
And don't forget, Power 9s were announced when? 2018? That's 8 years ago.
Yeah.
The gentleman with the Power 8, when were they announced?
Yeah.
2014? Is that right?
About right. It's about right.
Sounds right.
So it's 11-year-old server and an 8-year-old server. And keep your assets current best you can. That'll definitely help you.
And some of you may even be in a compliance situation, right? Because there's no firmware being provided for those old machines anymore. So if you're in banking, finance, a lot of these kind of things, oh wait, you can't update that anymore? Well, then you can't be in the data center anymore. So there's other reasons like that as well that could force your hand.
All right. Can you discuss virtual HMC versus HMC physical appliance?
I love the virtual HMC myself. Now, to be fair, there are two of them. There's Power Virtual HMC, which you can run on your Power system, and x86 Virtual HMC, which runs in VMware and other hypervisors. The single biggest problem with the Power HMC is you cannot run it on the machine that you're managing. That should be obvious, because if I can't start the machine to get my HMC running and I need to run my HMC to start my machine, it's that chicken egg problem, right? So you could have an HMC on one machine managing another, but so that hasn't been a big play in from what I've seen in data centers. But the virtual HMC, if there's a single biggest benefit to the virtual HMC, is when you're patching that thing, it patches about 10 times faster, because there's no boot up cycle in a hypervisor. You put the fix on and it says you must reboot for this fix, and
back up.
Yeah, within a second, that thing is already coming back up, and the most of the time is spent restarting all the big Java stuff that's behind the interface, right?
Yeah.
And of course, it takes no use of space. It's already in there, right?
Yeah, and from just to touch on.
Oh, please, Richie, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, just to touch on it from like a number crunching and sales guy standpoint. Virtual HMC, as long as you keep paying your maintenance on that virtual HMC, you're going to get the most recent code. And like with a physical HMC, say you invested 5-6 years ago in a CR1 HMC, you're going to have to buy a CR2. And they're great tools, but they're not cheap. They're not cheap tools. But you go to Power 11, you're going to have to buy a new HMC, because you can't run a CR1 HMC with Power 11. Virtual HMC, just upgrade to the most recent code. So I think investment protection is also another big piece of virtualization.
Yep.
I want to throw a caveat in there as well. I have a customer that had a virtual HMC. They put a Power 10 in about a year or so, give or take. And they had a ransomware attack and their entire VMware environment's destroyed. And they're saying, we wish we bought a physical HMC because you do get that physical segregation. And, you know,
buy one of each.
Perspective.
Yeah, buy two. They're small.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. No, that's a very valid point. And depending on your compliance situation, that could absolutely be a thing, right? You know, we look a lot at the vast majority of systems by quantity are in small shops. So that's where we see a lot of those. But you get into the larger ones, again, the banking, the finance, the healthcare, you know, those kind of guys, you may want that physical machine so it can sit right next to your power system and have nothing to do with VMware.
And Michelle's joined us with the hook, I'm assuming.
I am, yes. I just wanted to thank everyone for attending today. We are at our time, but thank you for joining us. Thank you to Larry, Richie, and Steve. This was great and super informational for us. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of these three. They'd be happy to answer any questions that you guys might have. The recording will be available in the next 24 hours if you'd like to rewatch or to send it to someone. But we appreciate the time for you guys joining us today, and we will talk to you guys later. Thanks so much and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks all.